Hello, and welcome to Gloomy Realm. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy slow, unsettling stories that gently lead you beyond the familiar and into forgotten places where shadows linger, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, let your body relax into stillness, and allow the sounds of the outside world to quietly fade away. Tonight, the veil between worlds begins to thin, revealing a realm where forgotten whispers echo through the darkness, and every story leaves a shadow behind. So close your eyes, listen carefully, and let yourself wander through the gloomy realm. Story 1. When I was 25, I decided I had finally had enough of people. That sounds dramatic now, but back then it felt simple. I was tired of noise, tired of neighbors, tired of work, tired of seeing the same faces and hearing the same small talk every day. I had come into a little inheritance money after my grandfather passed, not enough to make me rich, but enough to give me a chance to disappear for a while. So I did what a lot of people only talk about doing. I packed what I owned, sold what I did not need, and bought a small cabin in Montana, far enough from town that no one came by unless they had a reason. Silence was what I wanted, and silence was exactly what I got. At first, it was perfect. The cabin was rough, but solid. It sat in a stretch of deep woods with mountains in the distance and a long valley below. There were no close neighbors, no traffic, no streetlights. At night, when the fire burned low and the wind moved through the trees, I could almost believe I was the last person alive. That thought might scare some people. Back then, it comforted me. I had always loved reading, and out there I had all the time in the world for it. I read everything I could get my hands on. The Catcher in the Rye, 1984, Moby Dick, Crime and Punishment, old westerns, old poetry, history books, hunting guides, even damaged paperbacks I bought for $1 in town. If it had words, I would read it. Some days I read until my eyes hurt and the room went dark around me. But I was not just sitting around pretending to be some mountain poet. I worked hard too. I cut my own firewood. I hunted my own meat. I grew vegetables in a garden behind the cabin. I learned how to fix things because there was no one nearby to fix them for me. I patched the roof, repaired fences, cleaned my rifle, smoked meat, salted meat, and stacked wood until my hands grew rough and cracked. The woods were beautiful, but they were not gentle. That was something city people never understood when they talked about living in the wilderness. Beauty did not mean safety. A clear morning could turn into a snowstorm by afternoon. A wrong step on a wet slope could break your ankle, and if that happened far from the cabin, no one would hear you call for help. There were bears, mountain lions, deep cold, falling trees, sickness, infection, and 100 other ways to die quietly. Still, for a long time, I thought the peace was worth the danger. Only a few times a month did I drive into town. I bought things I could not make or grow myself: ammunition, clothes, medicine, lamp oil, salt, coffee, sugar, and sometimes books if the little used shop had anything new. Then I would drive back, unload the truck, lock the door, and feel relief the moment the town disappeared behind me. It was paradise, or at least my version of it. Then came the fall of 1989. My garden had done well that year. I had potatoes, carrots, onions, squash, and jars of preserves lined up in the cellar. My shed was full of lumber and firewood. The roof was patched, the stove was cleaned, and the cabin was ready for winter. The only thing I was short on was meat. Usually, one or two elk were enough to get me through the cold months, depending on their size and how carefully I used the meat. I had some grouse and smaller game stored away, but not enough. Winter in Montana was not something to gamble with. If a storm trapped me in for weeks, or if my truck broke down, or if sickness hit at the wrong time, I needed more food than I thought I would use. Out there, being careful was not fear. It was survival. So one morning, just after dawn, I took my rifle, packed a few supplies, and left the cabin to hunt. The air was cold enough to sting my lungs, but not yet bitter. Frost clung to the grass in pale patches, and the light came slowly through the trees. I remember feeling strong that morning. I was young, lean, and used to the land. My boots knew the trails, my legs knew the hills, my hands knew the weight of the rifle across my shoulder. The animals around that area rarely saw people, so they were not as nervous as animals near towns or main roads. You still had to be careful, of course, but if you were quiet and knew where to look, you could get close enough for a clean shot. I hiked up to a ridge not far from the cabin. From there, I could see down into the valley where elk sometimes grazed in small groups. When I reached the top, I took out my rifle and looked through the scope. I moved slowly across the open ground below, searching for the shape of antlers, dark bodies, movement in the grass. For a while, I saw nothing. Then, at the far edge of my view, something moved. It was not an elk. A bobcat was feeding on the carcass of a mule deer. She crouched low over it, shoulders rising and falling as she tore at the meat. I watched her for a moment. She was beautiful, in the way wild things are beautiful, sharp and hard and completely at home in the world. Lucky thing, I thought. She had found herself a meal without much trouble. But her being there also meant she had probably scared off anything else nearby. I lowered the rifle, packed up, and headed south toward a watering hole I knew. I had seen tracks there before, and if any elk were moving through the area, there was a good chance they would stop there before evening. The hike was not easy. The ground was uneven, and I had to move through brush, over fallen logs, and around thick stands of trees. But I was used to that. Back then, I could walk for hours with weight on my back and think nothing of it. It took me 3 or 4 hours to reach the watering hole. By then, the day was already starting to lean toward evening. The sun sat lower, and the shadows had grown long. I found a spot far enough back from the water that I would not be noticed. Then, I settled in to wait. Waiting is most of hunting. People who do not hunt think it is all walking, tracking, aiming, shooting. Sometimes it is. Most of the time, it is being still and quiet for so long that your own thoughts become too loud. I pulled out my copy of Crime and Punishment and started reading to pass the time. The pages were worn, and the cover was soft from being carried around so much. I had read less than 20 pages when I heard brush moving nearby. I closed the book. The sound came again. Slow, heavy movement, not a squirrel, not a bird. I raised my rifle and watched the edge of the greenery. 2 elk came out. They moved without hurry, stepping from the brush toward the water. One was too small to bother with. The other was a good size, larger than I expected to see that day. It moved with its head low, ears twitching, body thick and healthy. I clicked off the safety and held as still as I could. I waited until the larger one stepped to the edge of the pond and lowered its head to drink. Then I fired. The shot cracked through the trees. The elk jumped, took 3 heavy steps, and collapsed. The smaller one bolted into the forest, crashing through brush until the sound faded. I stayed still for a moment, listening. Then I approached the fallen elk. The shot had gone clean through the lungs. It was dead quickly, which was what I wanted. When I got closer, I saw that it was even bigger than I had thought. I remember feeling a tired, honest satisfaction. Not a bad day, I thought. Cleaning it took time. The light was already fading by the time I was done. I wrapped the meat in the hide and slung the load over my shoulder. It was heavy. Too heavy, really, but I wanted to get back to the cabin before the temperature dropped too far. I knew I would have to hurry. I was not too worried. I had not seen a bear in a couple of years, and I knew the way home well. Still, carrying that much fresh meat through the woods near dark was never something to take lightly. Every sound seemed sharper. Every shadow seemed to move. The sun went down when I was about half an hour from the cabin. By then, I was close enough that memory and moonlight could guide me. The moon was not full, but it gave enough light to turn the path silver in places. My breathing had grown heavy. The elk was larger than I had judged, and the weight of the meat pulled hard on my shoulders and back. My legs burned. My hands were cold. But through the trees ahead, I could see a faint line of smoke rising from my chimney into the night sky. That sight always made me feel safe. The stars were out too, bright and sharp in the clear Montana sky. I had seen those stars hundreds of nights, but they still had a way of making me feel small and alone. Most of the time, I liked that feeling. That night, with the meat on my back and the woods dark around me, I liked it less. Then I heard a twig snap behind me. I turned so fast the load shifted on my shoulder. For one terrible second, I expected to see a bear. It was an elk. It stood among the trees, partly hidden in the dark. I could not tell if it was the smaller one from earlier or another one entirely. Elk usually did not come that close to my cabin, but I told myself it must have wandered without noticing where it was. Animals act differently in the dark. Maybe it had not seen me until I turned around. I watched it for a moment, my heart still beating hard. There was something strange about the way it stood. Too still. Too aware. Its nose twitched. Not like an elk's nose, like a rabbit's. Then it turned its head and looked straight at me. I tightened my grip on the meat and stared back. I remember wondering, in a strange and stupid way, if it knew what I was carrying, if it could smell the blood, if it understood that I had one of its kind slung across my back. Then it stood up on its hind legs. I did not move. I do not think I breathed. The elk rose slowly, awkwardly at first, then with a horrible kind of balance that no elk should have. Its front legs hung in front of its chest like arms. Its body stretched tall, long, too thin in the moonlight. For a moment, it stood there looking at me from a height that made my stomach turn. Then it walked away on two legs. Not hopped, not stumbled. Walked, it turned from me and moved between the trees, upright and silent, until the darkness swallowed it. I stood frozen for a long time after it disappeared. I tried to make sense of what I had seen. Maybe it had reared up. Maybe the shadows had confused me. Maybe exhaustion and the weight of the meat had played a trick on my eyes. Animals sometimes do strange things. Nature is full of ugly little surprises. That is what I told myself. It was just a strange coincidence, a terrifying one, but still only a coincidence. I made it back to the cabin, locked the door behind me, and got to work. I did not want the meat to spoil, and work helped keep my mind away from the thing I had seen. I packed the meat in salt, carried it to the cellar, and stored it carefully. By the time I finished, my arms shook from exhaustion. I came back upstairs, washed as best I could, and tried to settle down. The cabin felt warmer with the stove going. The fire popped softly. The walls looked solid. The door was locked. I told myself I was safe. Before bed, I read a few more chapters of Crime and Punishment by lantern light. I do not remember what part of the book I was on. I read the same lines again and again without taking them in. Every time the wind moved outside, my eyes went to the window. Eventually, tiredness won. I blew out the lantern and fell asleep. When I woke, it was still dark. For a moment, I did not know why I had woken. Then I heard rain tapping against the roof. Not a storm yet, but steady enough to keep me from sleeping again. Thunder rolled far away. I lit a candle and sat up, listening. Bad weather did not worry me much, but thunder that early in the season could mean trouble by morning. I decided to cook something. There was some old grouse I had been meaning to finish, and I knew I would not get back to sleep. I went to the stove, started the fire, and put the meat on. The smell filled the cabin slowly, rich and familiar. I was thinking about hunting again the next day if the weather cleared. I had the elk meat, and technically I could get by with what I had, but I still wanted more. Out there, something could always go wrong. A bad storm, spoiled food, an injury. There was no such thing as being too careful when the nearest help was miles away. The grouse was cooking nicely when I heard a tap on the window. I froze. Tap, I turned my head slowly. Tap, I told myself it was a branch. The wind had picked up, and there was an old tree near that side of the cabin. Branches scraped the cabin sometimes. That was all. Still, the sound made my skin tighten. I picked up the candle and walked to the window. The flame shook in my hand. Outside, rain streaked the glass. A branch was moving in the wind, brushing the window with each gust. Tap, I breathed out and almost laughed at myself. Of course it was a branch. I was still shaken from what I had seen earlier. That was all. No animal stood on two legs outside my cabin. No impossible thing had followed me home. The woods were strange sometimes, but they were still the woods. I went back to the stove. When the meat was done, I sat at the small table and started to eat. I had lifted the first bite halfway to my mouth when the bedroom window shattered. Glass exploded inward. The sound was so loud in the small cabin that I dropped the fork and nearly fell from the chair. Cold wind rushed through the broken window, carrying rain into the room. Shards of glass glittered on the floor and across the blankets. Then came the scream. I have heard elk call before. I have heard animals in pain. I have heard coyotes make sounds that could turn a man's blood cold. This was not any of those things. It was a scream, long, tearing, and full of rage. I grabbed the candle and looked toward the broken window. The elk stood outside on its hind legs. The same one. I knew it was the same one, though I cannot explain how. It stood in the rain, tall and thin and wrong, its front legs hanging like arms at its sides. Its eyes were fixed on me through the broken window. Rain ran down its face. Its mouth opened wider than it should have, and it screamed again. I stumbled back and grabbed my rifle. My hands shook so badly I could barely load it. Bullets slipped from my fingers and rolled across the floor. The elk screamed again, pressing closer to the window, its breath blowing into the room in hot, wet bursts. I could smell it. Blood, mud, rain, and something rotten underneath. Finally, I got around chambered. I did not bother with the scope. There was no time. I raised the rifle, aimed at the shape filling the window, and fired. The bullet hit its shoulder. The elk screamed, louder this time. One of its front legs, or arms, or whatever it had become, jerked and hung loose by a strip of tendon and flesh. Blood darkened its wet hide. But it did not fall. It did not run. It got angrier. It threw itself at the window. The opening was too small for its whole body, but it forced its head and neck through, smashing the frame wider as it pushed. Its antlers scraped the wall. Its mouth opened and closed, snapping at the air. Its long neck thrashed from side to side, knocking books from the shelf and sending glass skittering across the floor. It screamed and screamed inside my cabin, filling the room with that impossible sound. I chambered another bullet. This time, it was impossible to miss. I fired straight into its head. The scream stopped. The elk went limp, hanging halfway through the window. Blood dripped from its nose and mouth onto my floor. Its body twitched once in the rain outside, then became still. For a few seconds, I only stood there, ears ringing, rifle smoking in my hands. The cabin smelled of gunpowder, wet fur, blood, and cooked grouse. Rain blew through the broken window. The thing's head hung inside, its dead eyes staring at the floor. I did not go closer. I did not check if it was truly dead. I grabbed my keys, my coat, and the rifle. Then I ran to my truck, started it, and drove away as fast as I could. Mud sprayed behind me. Branches whipped the sides of the truck. I did not look back once. I live in the city now. I have a wife, children, neighbors, traffic, streetlights, and more noise than I once thought I could stand. And I am grateful for all of it. I hate silence now. I keep music playing during the day. At night, I leave a fan running. Sometimes I fall asleep with the television on, just to hear another human voice in the room. My family thinks it is a habit I picked up from living alone too long. They do not know the truth. They do not know that in my dreams I still see that thing with its head stuck through my window, thrashing from side to side, screaming with blood running from its mouth. They do not know that sometimes, when the house gets too quiet, I hear a twig snap behind me and feel that old cold fear climb up my spine. Part of me wonders if its skeleton is still there, hanging through the broken window of that cabin in the Montana woods. A monument to something that should not exist. A warning to anyone who thinks the wilderness is peaceful just because it is quiet. I will never go back to find out. Story 2. I shouldn't be alive after what happened to me last winter. My cabin sat on 50 acres of frozen land, far away from any real road and even farther from the nearest town. In summer, the place could look almost peaceful. The grass grew high, the trees were full and green, and my bison moved across the land like slow living shadows. But in winter, everything changed. Snow covered the fields, the trees went bare, and the whole world became white, silent, and cruel. The bison were usually easy to spot from the cabin windows. They looked like dark rocks scattered across the snow, their thick bodies standing out against all that white. I had raised most of them myself, and even though they were not pets, I knew their habits. I knew which ones stayed together, which ones wandered, which ones were still young enough to act nervous around me. They were part of the land in the same way the cabin was. Seeing them out there made the place feel less empty. That winter, empty was exactly how it felt. The only phone I had was the house phone on the first floor, mounted on the wall beside the stairs. It was not like a normal phone in the city. It used an antenna on top of the cabin to send and receive calls. It was old and unreliable, but it had worked well enough for emergencies. Until it didn't. The antenna was broken. I found it one morning when I went outside to clear snow from the porch. At first, I thought it had come loose from the wind, but there had been no storm the night before. No heavy snowfall. No strong gusts. Nothing that could have done that kind of damage. When I climbed up to check it, I saw that it had not simply snapped or fallen. It looked torn off. The metal was bent in a strange way, twisted back from the roof like something had grabbed it and ripped it loose. I stood there in the freezing air, staring at it for a long time. I told myself it was old. Maybe the metal had weakened. Maybe ice had built up in a way I had not noticed. Maybe some animal had climbed onto the roof and damaged it. None of those answers felt right, but out there, alone in winter, you learn to accept whatever explanation lets you keep moving. I still had food then, but not much. It was the middle of winter, and the temperatures regularly dropped far below freezing. I had planned for a long stay. I had done this before. I knew how to ration food, how to stretch supplies, and how to keep myself busy when the snow locked me in. But that winter had gone worse than expected. Some supplies had spoiled, some had been used too fast during a stretch of bad weather. By the time I really counted everything, I realized I had maybe 2 days of food left if I rationed it carefully, less if I ate normally. There were still 2 or 3 months of winter ahead. That kind of math does something to your mind. I had not gone hunting all winter because I thought I had enough stored. I also had the bison, but most of them were too young to butcher for a good amount of meat. Killing them would have been a waste unless I had no other choice. And even then, I hated the thought of it. I had raised them. They were not companions exactly, but they were mine. So I decided to hunt. There was enough wildlife in the area if you knew where to look. Moose moved through the river valley. Wild bison sometimes passed farther north. Caribou crossed the open ground in the deep cold, and small mammals lived in the brush and under the snow. It would not be easy, but I had hunted before. One good moose could feed me for a long time if I stored the meat right. I spent a full day preparing. I checked my rifle, counted my rounds, packed what little food I could spare, and sharpened my knife. I went out into the woods and set up a hunting perch near a river a few miles from the cabin. It was nothing fancy, just a raised place where I could sit above the ground and watch the water. Animals came to the river even in winter, especially where the ice was thin or broken. While I was setting up the perch, something about the wind felt wrong. I know that sounds strange. Wind is just wind. But when you spend enough time alone outside, you start to notice its moods. Some winds feel clean and sharp. Some feel heavy with snow. Some carry the smell of animals or wet earth or smoke. That day, the wind felt like a warning. It moved through the trees in short, uneasy breaths. It would rise, then stop. Rise, then stop. Each time it stopped, the woods felt too still. I remember standing by the river with my hands on the ladder of the perch, looking into the trees, feeling like the forest was watching me back. I almost went home right then, but I needed food. The next morning, I left at first light. The sky was pale gray, and the air was cold enough to hurt my lungs when I breathed in too deeply. Snow crunched under my boots as I crossed the open land toward the forest. On the way, I passed through the clearing where my bison usually wandered in small groups. But that morning, they were all together. Every one of them. They stood shoulder to shoulder in the snow, facing the tree line. That stopped me. Bison do gather sometimes, especially in bad weather or when they feel threatened. But the sky was calm, and there was no storm coming. Usually, mine moved in groups of 2 or 3, spread out across the land while they fed or rested. I had never seen them packed together like that, all staring at the same place. I called out to them once. None of them turned. They just stood there, silent and still, watching the trees. I told myself they had smelled a predator. Maybe wolves had passed through. Maybe a bear had wandered too close. It was not impossible, even in winter. Still, as I walked past them, I felt their fear like a pressure in the air. I kept going. The forest seemed darker than usual when I entered it. The trees were thick with snow, and the path to the river was narrow and quiet. Each branch above me carried a white weight. Every so often, snow slipped loose and fell softly to the ground. The forest felt wrong that day, not empty. Hungry, I reached the perch, climbed up, and settled in with my rifle across my knees. The river moved below me, black and cold between white banks. I waited. For about half an hour, nothing happened. Then I saw a moose. It stepped out from the trees on the far side of the river, slow and careful. It was large and beautiful, with wide antlers that rose from its head like pale branches. It lowered its mouth to the water and began to drink. For a moment, I only watched it. Then hunger pulled me back to reality. I raised my rifle, aimed, and fired. The gunshot cracked through the forest. The moose dropped, and then everything went silent. Not quiet. Silent, the wind stopped. The birds stopped. The little cracks and shifts of the forest disappeared. Even the river seemed to lose its sound. It was as if the whole world had been muted. I held my breath. Then, the gunshot happened again. But it did not come from my rifle. The sound came from deeper in the forest. It was almost the same as my shot, but not quite. It was deeper, heavier, and a fraction of a second too long. Like something had heard the sound and tried to copy it, but didn't understand exactly how. Every part of my body told me to leave. My hands tightened around the rifle. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stared into the trees, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. Then I looked back at the moose lying near the river. That was food. Not just food for one meal. Food for days. Maybe weeks if I worked fast and preserved it properly. I could not walk away from it. I had 2 days of supplies left in the cabin. Hunger has a way of arguing louder than fear. So I climbed down from the perch. It took maybe 30 seconds. I had to turn my back to the river while I used the ladder. I remember telling myself over and over that I would grab the moose, process it quickly, and get home before dark. When my boots touched the snow, I turned back. The moose was gone. At first, my mind refused to understand what I was seeing. The place where it had fallen was empty. There was only a small puddle of blood in the snow. No tracks, no drag marks, no trail leading away. The snow around the spot was smooth and undisturbed, as if the moose had never been there at all. I ran. I did not think about the cold, or the rifle, or the meat. I ran through the trees, slipping and stumbling, crashing through brush without caring how much noise I made. Something was wrong in those woods, and I no longer cared about proving to myself that I was brave. When I reached the clearing near my cabin, the bison were still there, still gathered together, still facing the tree line. They ignored me as I ran past. Not one of them turned its head. Not one made a sound. I reached the cabin, rushed inside, and locked every door. For the rest of that day, I stayed inside with a rifle beside me. I kept looking out the windows. The bison stayed in the clearing until dark. I could not see what they were watching, but I knew it was somewhere in the trees. That night, I barely slept. By morning, hunger was waiting for me again. 1 day had passed since the moose incident. My food supply was almost gone. I hated the thought of going back into the forest, but I had no real choice. I made a plan. I would return to the perch and try one more time. If anything strange happened, I would come straight back and butcher 1 or 2 of the bison, no matter how much I hated it. Waiting to starve would not save them or me. The moment I entered the forest, the world seemed to go quiet again. This time, the silence did not shock me as much. Maybe I had expected it. Maybe some part of me already knew the woods were waiting. I reached the perch and climbed up. My fingers were stiff from the cold, and my mouth was dry. Then I saw a moose. It stood near the river in the same place as before. Same size, same beautiful antlers. I swear on my life it was the same moose. My skin went cold under my coat. I tried to tell myself I was wrong. There could be more than one moose in the area. Maybe they looked similar. Maybe my fear was making connections that were not there. I repeated those thoughts in my head, but they did not help. Then the moose slowly turned its head toward me. It looked directly at me. It did not blink. It did not move like an animal listening for danger. It watched me with a stillness that felt almost human. My hands began to shake. I raised the rifle anyway. I fired. The bullet passed through the space where the moose had been and struck a tree behind it. The moose was gone. There was no sound of hooves, no crash through the brush, no splash in the river. It simply was not there anymore. That was enough. I climbed down as fast as I could and started back toward the cabin. I had made my decision. I would butcher a few of my bison and wait out the winter as best as I could. It would be hard, and it would hurt, but it was better than stepping into those woods again. When I entered the clearing, my stomach dropped. All my bison were dead. Every single one. They were strewn across the snow like broken dark shapes, their bodies scattered across the clearing. Blood covered the ground around them in wide red patches. Their throats had been torn open, but nothing had been eaten. Not a single pound of meat was missing. That was what scared me most. A predator kills to eat. Whatever did this had killed to take my options away. I stood there in the cold, staring at them, and for the first time I understood something clearly. I was not the only intelligent thing out there. I stumbled back to the cabin and locked myself inside again. For a while I did not know what to do. I had no food left, no working phone, no bison, and no way to call for help. I thought about collecting the remains and using what meat I could. The thought made me sick, but hunger does not care what disgusts you. So after some time, I forced myself outside. The clearing was empty. The bison were gone. The blood was gone too, not frozen, not covered by snow. Gone, the snow lay smooth and white, as if nothing had happened there at all. I walked to the place where the nearest body had been. There should have been blood soaked into the ground. There should have been tracks. There should have been some sign that my animals had been lying there only a short time earlier. There was nothing. I backed away and returned to the cabin. That was when panic truly set in. Farming was impossible. The ground was frozen solid under the snow. Escaping on foot would be dangerous and stupid. I had planned to stay there through winter and have a friend pick me up when the roads became usable again. Nobody was expecting to hear from me before then. Calling for help was impossible because the antenna had been torn off. That left only one option. I had to go hunting again. I knew it was stupid. I knew the forest was wrong. I knew something out there was playing with me, but I had no other choice. So I took my rifle and went back into the trees. The silence did not surprise me anymore. It followed me like a shadow. I searched for hours. I checked the river. I checked the game trails. I watched for tracks, movement, broken branches, anything. I saw nothing. No moose, no birds, no rabbits, no signs of life at all. And slowly a thought began to form in my mind. Whatever this thing was, it could have killed me already. It had come close enough to tear the antenna off my roof. It had taken the moose without leaving tracks. It had slaughtered my bison and then removed every trace of them. If it wanted me dead, I would already be dead. That was when I realized the truth. It did not want to kill me. It wanted me to starve. Story 3. A lot of people ask me why I do not carry a smartphone. These days, that makes people look at you like you are strange. I still have a phone, but it is one of those very basic models that can only call and text. No apps, no scrolling, no social media, no camera I care about, no bright screen pulling my eyes in every 5 minutes. I am not even old enough for people to excuse it. Most people assume I hate technology, or that I am trying to make some kind of point about modern life. That is not it. My wife rolls her eyes whenever she sees me using it. She calls it my comfort brick. She says it looks like something a tired uncle would keep in his glove box for emergencies. Then she goes back to watching life hacks and recipe videos on TikTok. Like the glowing thing in her hand is harmless. I have tried to explain it to her a few times, but I never know where to begin. It always sounds crazy before I even reach the important part. So I am writing this down to put my thoughts in order. Maybe if I tell it from the beginning, it will make more sense. A couple of years ago, I was working on my master's degree, and I was struggling badly with my paper. I could not find a subject that felt strong enough. Every idea I had was either too broad, too boring, or already done by someone much smarter than me. Time was running out, and I was starting to panic. I managed to get a deadline extension, but only under one condition. I had to present a proper topic soon. I was close to giving up when one of my professors suggested I speak to a man working in the private sector. He was a licensed doctor who had left regular medicine and moved into private research. My professor said the man was involved in medical hardware and would probably have some kind of project I could use as a basis for my paper. I contacted him, and to my surprise, he asked me to come in that same day. I will call him Solomon. Solomon and his team worked out of a real laboratory. Not a messy office with a few machines, but an actual laboratory with white rooms, sealed doors, clean benches, and people in lab coats moving between different stations. Most of their work involved medical devices, so they needed sterile spaces to protect sensitive electronics. Solomon himself was hard to miss. He was about 6'6" and completely bald, with a head so smooth it almost shone under the lab lights. He towered over everyone, but there was nothing aggressive about him. He spoke softly. He shook my hand calmly and nodded while I explained who I was and what I needed. At first, I thought he seemed kind. You can usually feel that in people, or at least you think you can. After I explained my situation, he made a suggestion. "I'm working on a project called Lease," he said. "I cannot share all the production details, but we collect a lot of data related to sleep. I could share that data with you for your paper." That was exactly what I needed. Sleep data could support all kinds of research. It was broad enough to work with, but specific enough to build a proper study around. I thanked him too many times, probably, but I was relieved. It felt like someone had thrown me a rope right before I went under. Soon after that, I was scheduled to help Solomon and his team collect test subjects for the LIST project. The process sounded simple. Participants would take a supplement before bed and wear a headband while sleeping. The headband recorded data during the night. It did not matter if they slept for 8 hours, 2 hours, or barely slept at all. Data was data. Solomon called it bulk collection. His team had already gone through around 20 versions of the project, and this would be the 21st generation. I was not allowed to see the earlier versions, but I was promised full access to the Generation 21 bulk data. That was more than enough for my master's paper. I put up posters around campus, and people started signing up almost right away. A lot of students wanted experience with private sector research. Having Solomon's name on a CV could be more valuable than the small amount of money they were offered. though everyone still received a symbolic payment for their time. When the sign-ups began coming in, Solomon asked me something. "Why don't you participate too?" he said. "You could give us useful feedback on the method. If you think your data might affect the results, we can separate it. But I think it would be valuable for you to experience the process." I hesitated. "Are you sure that would be appropriate?" "Of course," he said with a smile. "You are already part of this. You might as well get your hands dirty." I wanted to say no. I should have said no. But I was young, tired, and desperate to finish my degree. So I signed up. In the end, there were 14 of us in the study. Some were medical students, some were dental students. A couple were studying veterinary medicine. We were all brought into a cramped meeting room for a short presentation. There was an oval table, cheap chairs, and a projector showing a slightly blurry slideshow on a stained screen. "Data collection takes place over 2 weeks, Solomon explained, pointing at a calendar. "That gives us enough time to account for irregular sleep patterns. If you miss a day or two, do not worry. We have planned for that." Then he showed us the equipment. The first item was a headband used to record sleep. It looked like something an athlete from the 1980s might wear, except it had small sensors and a charging port. There was a cable to charge it during the day. The second item was a small bottle of gel capsules. "This supplement helps us record your experience more accurately," Solomon said. "It should not do much to affect your sleep. We do need you to take one about 10 minutes before bed. 20 minutes if you have eaten a large meal. Do not bite down on it unless you want your mouth to taste like crunchy salt. If you do not take the capsule, do not bother wearing the headband that night. The data will be useless." The bottle was plain, labeled CMP5. It had a printed list of known side effects, but they were so general they could have been copied from a bottle of ibuprofen. Dizziness, nausea, dry mouth, mild headache, things like that. That was all. We collected our kits and went home. That night, I charged the headband, worked on my paper for a while, and tried to treat the whole thing like any other study. When it was time to sleep, I followed the instructions. I took one capsule, put on the headband, and set my alarm. The headband was more comfortable than I expected. It even had massage and heat settings. One side was thicker, so if you turned it slightly, it could cover your eyes like a sleep mask. That suited me perfectly. I had wanted a sleep mask for ages. I remember thinking I might ask Solomon if I could keep it after the study ended, maybe instead of payment. It probably had Bluetooth speakers for white noise too, if I bothered to check. Falling asleep was easy that first night. I felt calm. The room was quiet. My alarm was set. There was no traffic outside, no strange noises, no humming from the walls. Only the faint, salty taste of the capsule on my tongue. What stayed with me after all these years is the dream I had that night. It was the clearest dream I had ever experienced. Not because it was beautiful or strange, but because it felt completely real. It was also the first lucid dream I ever had. I knew I was asleep while it was happening. I dreamed I was back at my old middle school in South Dakota. I was walking down a hallway, looking at the drawings we used to hang on the walls. Most of them looked like wild scribbles, but every now and then I saw something recognizable. A smiling farmer, someone's dog, a sunflower, except the petals were blue. Everything had detail. The slate texture of the floor, the soundproof ceiling tiles we used to stick pens into by flicking them hard enough, the wide hallways with enough room for students to run on one side and teachers to walk down the middle, even the welcome mat outside our homeroom. I remembered the font on it. I saw people I had not thought about in years. My teacher sat at her desk, grading papers. There was a globe by the window with dirty fingerprints all over North America. Whenever someone in class went on a trip, they were allowed to put a pin on the globe to show where they were going. I ran my hand across my old desk, feeling the little scratches and notches under my fingertips. Then, the speaker system crackled. I turned and saw my teacher sit up straight. She looked directly at me and spoke at the exact same time as the voice coming through the speaker. Lima, India, Sierra. I took a few steps closer. She kept looking at me while her right hand continued grading papers. She turned pages without looking down. Lima, India, Sierra. Someone walked past in the hallway. I could hear distant chatter behind the sound of the announcement. Some of the drawings on the wall had changed. One of them had the number 21 written on it. Lima, India, Sierra. My teacher turned her attention back to the papers. That was when I felt cold all over. Something was wrong. Something had changed in a way that could not be undone. I turned around. I saw something. Someone. Then I woke up screaming. I threw the headband across the room and jumped out of bed. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I had only slept for 3 hours, but I was wide awake. I ran to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. When I looked in the mirror, I saw that I had been crying. My face was red and swollen. For a while, I just sat on the edge of my bed, holding the headband in both hands. I was shaking, waiting for my body to calm down enough to sleep again. It took nearly an hour. When I finally went back to bed, I did not use the headband as a sleep mask. I wore it properly, high on my forehead. I slept a few more hours, but I did not dream again. The next morning, I scheduled a call with Solomon. When he called, I was halfway through a cheese and ham sandwich. My hair was sticking up in one spot, making me look ridiculous on the video call. "First night," Solomon said. "How did it go?" "I'll be honest," I said. "Not great." "Nightmares?" The way he said it caught me off guard. He was not surprised. He sounded like he had expected it. Before I could answer, he continued. "It is not uncommon. In fact, it is very helpful. We have more than enough data from people simply sleeping. But nightmares are different. We do not have nearly as much of that. It is much more valuable to us." "How did you know I had one?" I asked. "It is common," he said. "Some people get nightmares. Some feel claustrophobic. Others stop using the headband after a couple of nights. If that is what it feels like, I understand why. Do you want to quit the study?" I thought about it. I wanted to quit badly, but I could not afford to. I needed the data. If I stepped away now, my paper might fall apart. I swallowed my fear and shook my head. "No," I said. "I'm okay. But I have a question. What does Lima, India, Sierra mean?" "That is just an activation phrase," Solomon said. It comes from the headband as a synchronization signal. Think of it like a clapperboard on a movie set. Is it dangerous?" Solomon chuckled softly. "It is just information." The next night, I was nervous about going to bed. I drank some milk, got ready, and spent an hour scrolling on my phone, trying to make myself tired enough that I would not care. But the fear stayed there. I kept wondering if Solomon had caused the nightmare on purpose. Maybe that was what the capsule did. Maybe the whole point was to force bad dreams and record how our brains reacted. When I finally slept, I was so exhausted that I could not keep my eyes open. Once again, the dream was vivid. This time I was in my high school gymnasium. It was completely empty. Every step echoed against the walls. The walls were covered with pictures of old school events and sports wins. Then, the voice came again. Not through a speaker this time. It seemed to come from everywhere. From the walls, from the floor, from the air itself. Lima, India, Sierra. I remembered what had happened the last time I heard it. I spun around, searching for a way out. Since I knew I was dreaming, I tried to think in dream logic. Maybe if I hid, I could avoid whatever came next. Lima, India, Sierra. I saw an old speaker box big enough to hide behind. I crawled into the space and pulled a wooden panel in front of me. Lima, India, Sierra. Then, everything went quiet. The fear lifted a little. I felt lighter, like the dream itself was loosening around me. Something gently tugged at the wooden panel. I held it as tightly as I could, but my grip was bad. It pulled. I pulled back. For 1 second, there was silence. Then the panel was ripped from my hands. I saw 2 feet dangling in the air in front of me. Then, something attacked. I woke up on the floor beside my bed, coughing and clutching my chest. I was crying so hard that I could barely breathe. My face was covered in tears and snot. I had only slept 4 hours. That continued for several nights. I was falling apart, but I still had classes. I still worked on my paper. Every day I went to the cafeteria and bought the same cheap cheese and ham sandwich for lunch. I tried to act normal, but I was exhausted. Going to bed became something I dreaded. I would stay awake too late because I was scared, which only made the next day worse. One afternoon, while eating lunch, I noticed I was not the only one who looked half dead. Across the cafeteria, I saw someone I recognized from Solomon's study. She was around my age, but in a different field. She had 2 cans of Red Bull in front of her, and looked like she was trying not to fall asleep face first into her food. I picked up my tray and walked over. "You're in Solomon's study, right?" I asked. She looked up. "Yeah?" She pressed 1/2 empty can of Red Bull against her temple like she was cooling her head. "Mind if I sit?" "Knock yourself out." Her name was Norma. She was from the Midwest and had started her studies later than most of us. She looked like someone who could make an amazing pot of chili and also fix a truck if she had to. "Trouble sleeping?" I asked. She nodded toward my face. "You too?" "Yeah, we talked for a few minutes." I told her I was working on my master's thesis. She told me she was about to start an internship. Then I lowered my voice. "I hear this phrase," I said. "Whenever I hear it, I know things are about to get bad." She looked up quickly. We said it at the same time. Lima, India, Sierra. Her eyes widened. "Yes," she said. "That's it." I hear that, and then he is just there. I paused. "Who is there?" "You know," she said. "The person. The thing. The one with the seam." "What?" "It looks like a person, but there is a seam down the middle. You can only really see it when it gets close. Maybe it's just me." The next night, I tried to look more carefully. I went into the dream with a mission. I wanted information. I was not just aware that I was dreaming. I was trying to study the dream. This time, I was at a beach from my childhood. My sister and mother were swimming in the shallow water. My father sat in a folding chair with a book in his hands. He looked up over the pages. Without changing expression, he turned a page and said, "Lima, India, Sierra." He repeated it again and again, while the others played in the water exactly as I remembered. I spun around, trying to find the thing Norma had described. As I looked, I noticed strange details in the background. A billboard had changed. Instead of advertising food or sunscreen, it said, "Initial contact, 2 hours, 41 minutes, 18 seconds. After my father repeated the phrase a 3rd time, I felt calm for one brief moment. Then terror hit. I turned quickly, searching in every direction. Then I saw it. A pale figure floating in the air. It looked almost human, but the head was too round, too swollen. Its arms did not move. Its chest vibrated in a fast, unnatural rhythm. Then I was awake, gasping. After that, Norma and I started having lunch together almost every day. We shared what we saw and compared details. I told her about the billboard. She told me she had seen something similar in one of her dreams. I dreamed about my high school graduation, she said, but my diploma looked like an email. What did it say? I could not read all of it before it got me, but there was an address. She handed me a slip of paper. I almost choked on my sandwich. It was Solomon's private email address, the same one my professor had given me when I first contacted him. Solomon did not give that address to just anyone. I checked my phone and showed Norma. It matched. That makes no sense, she said quietly. How can something from a dream be real? There were more dreams after that. Every time I was somewhere familiar. A classroom, a beach, a grocery store, a family living room from when I was small. And every time, at some point, I would hear those words. They came from different places. A bird outside a window, a TV in another room, a ringtone, an alarm clock, a car driving past. Lima, India, Sierra, then something would happen. Something would attack. Usually, I only saw it clearly right before waking up. Its fingers were webbed tightly together, like they could not bend properly. Its skin was not just pale, it had a faint green color, like dried grass. And every time I saw it, its feet never touched the ground. I would wake up screaming, crying, or falling out of bed. Once I was already standing when I realized I was awake. The fear of sleep became so bad that I stayed up later and later, which made everything worse. I kept telling myself the study had an end date. If I could survive 2 weeks, I would have the data I needed, finish my paper, and secure my future. But it was becoming harder to pretend I was fine. Soon our lunches grew into a larger group. Solomon probably had not expected all of us to eat in the same cafeteria. Norma and I were joined by Elmer, Candice, Joseph, Pat, and Misha. Everyone had similar dreams. Elmer swore the thing had no face. Candice said it looked like it was hanging in the air, like a scarecrow held up by invisible wires. Joseph said it was bald like Solomon. Pat said it did not really move, it just appeared in the air. Misha barely said anything at all. He hated thinking about it. Norma kept insisting on the scene. She said it ran down the middle of the thing's body, but you could only see it when it got close, like the spine of a leaf. We all agreed on one more thing. Just before we woke up, the thing did something. Something sudden. Something violent. But we could never remember it clearly. Candice was the one who started calling it the Floating Man. It was a good enough name. What scared us most was how consistent it was. We were all seeing the same thing, even though our dreams were different. How could that happen? How could one image appear in several minds at once? How could people share a nightmare? We sat there long after finishing our food, not knowing what to say. Finally, I said, I think it's the pills. Norma looked at me. You think so? I don't think they're supplements. I think they're causing this. Solomon basically said nightmares are valuable data. Everyone at the table groaned. It made sense in the worst possible way. We were underpaid students being used as test subjects. Could be some kind of mild Parkinson's medication, Elmer said. Something affecting dopamine. You think they would slip us something like that? Joseph asked. That would be a lawsuit. Unless it was hidden in the fine print, Candy said. Or maybe it's something milder. We should test it, I said. One night, we all skip the pill but still wear the headband. If the nightmares happen, it's the headband. If they don't, it's the pill. Then we can get the capsules tested. It was an experiment. We liked experiments. We exchanged numbers and made a group chat so we could keep each other updated. That night, I felt almost good going to bed. One way or another, I thought I would wake up with answers. I picked up the bottle of capsules, shook it, and pointed at it. Not tonight, I said. I put on music, got into bed, and wore the headband. In the group chat, some people had already gone to sleep. Others were still trying to work up the courage. Norma admitted she was nervous. I finally drifted off feeling confident. I did not realize I was asleep at first. It felt like closing my eyes and opening them again. But when I opened them, I was somewhere else. I was in a shopping mall my mother used to take me to when I was a kid. Most of the stores were full of early 2000s clothing. A few people walking around were dressed like they belonged in that time too. I saw my mother sitting on a bench, eating soft serve ice cream. At first, I walked around calmly. Then that confidence began to fade. The dream was vivid like the others, but something felt different this time. Heavier, sharper, more dangerous. A man working at a small stall turned toward me. Lima, he said. My stomach sank. It was happening without the pill. That meant it was the headband. A woman walked out of a clothing store. She kept walking in one direction, but her head turned toward me as she spoke. India, I looked around and noticed other conversations. A young couple sat at a juice bar, holding hands and staring lovingly into each other's eyes. One of them said, "Induction stabilized. Engagement in approximately 300 feet. The other kissed her hand and said, "Suppressor offline. Residual effectiveness 65%. Then they both turned toward me, their faces empty. Sierra, after that, they returned to their conversation. One said a number. The other answered with a smaller number. 200 feet. 100 feet. 50 feet. They were counting distance. A speaker crackled overhead. "Attention shoppers," it said. "All systems nominal. 40 feet. 30 feet. I looked everywhere, but I could not see the floating man. The dream felt wrong, because the danger was not where it usually was. I stepped out of the open and pressed my back against a store window. The numbers kept dropping. 20 feet. 10, I realized it had to be behind me. I turned. Behind the glass was a store mannequin with a blank face and slumped shoulders. As I looked closer, I saw a seam running down the middle of its body. Something hit me in the chest. Pain tore through my shoulder as I was thrown backward into the table where the couple had been sitting. They stood up calmly, ignoring me completely. I touched my shoulder. There was blood on my hand. I was not waking up. The floating man pushed through the glass window without breaking it. Something moved inside its chest. I heard a rhythmic tapping sound as something touched the tiled floor. That was when I understood. It was not really floating. It was being held up. And it was coming for me. I ran up an escalator. An old woman passed me going the other way. She looked at me and shook her head. Damage assessment. Moderate. My shoulder burned. The pain felt real. I looked down and saw the floating man coming closer, always hanging a few inches above the ground. I ran past a hot dog stand. The words on the front made me stop for half a second. Lima, India, Sierra. I shoved the cart behind me, hoping it would slow the thing down. On the wall nearby was a poster full of timestamps and initials. It looked like the way we organized study data. Information from the project was leaking into the dream. I ran into a bathroom. A man stood at the sink washing his hands. I rushed into a stall, locked it, and climbed onto the toilet. My shoulder hurt so badly that tears filled my eyes. I bit my lip and tried to stay quiet. I did not hear the bathroom door open. I only heard the careful tapping sound. Then the man at the sink stopped washing his hands. "Cortisol spike," he said. "Engagement in 3, 2, 1A blank face passed through the stall door." I screamed as the floating man pressed its chest against me. It was so close, it almost felt like a hug. I looked over its shoulder and finally saw something behind it. Something was holding it up, like a puppet. The seam in its chest opened. I shoved against it, but a bone like spike shot out and went straight through my hand below my left ring finger. I screamed. It pulled back and stabbed forward again, slicing off the top of my middle finger. The piece landed on the bathroom floor like a bit of meat. I had never felt pain like that. It was not dream pain. It was burning, throbbing, nerve-deep agony. I braced my feet against the back of the stall and kicked hard. The thing was pushed back through the door. I dropped down, turned left, and ran. Blood poured from my hand and shoulder. That was when the real fear hit me. I was lightheaded. How could I be lightheaded in a dream? What happened if I passed out inside a dream? What happened if I died there? I ran back into the main mall and stood in the middle of the crowd, bleeding and screaming for help. Every face turned toward me. No one helped. One person said, 190 beats per minute. Another said, adrenaline spiking. I kept screaming. From around the corner, the floating man appeared. I closed my eyes, clawed at my own face, and begged myself to wake up. For one brief moment, I opened my real eyes. I was in my bed. Sweat soaked the sheets. I tried to speak, but only a low moan came out. My mouth was dry and open. I had no control over my body. I was not awake, but I was not fully asleep either. I flopped my arm to the side and saw blood on my hand. I tried to move. I tried to get out of bed. Nothing worked. I could hear myself snoring as my eyes drifted shut again. Then I was back in a dream. But it was somewhere new. I was in a traffic jam on a highway in the late afternoon. It must have been another memory. Cars stretched for miles. Someone was honking. The nearest exit was nowhere in sight. As soon as I could move, I got out of my car and started walking past the stopped vehicles. Then I noticed someone inside one of them. Candice, she was leaning back in the driver's seat. Something had torn through her chest and broken her ribs open. Blood covered the windshield. I told myself it was only a dream. I said it out loud, again and again. Candice's body slumped to the side, her eyes fixed on me. Lima, I shook my head and ran. My chest pounded. My hand and shoulder still hurt. I was still bleeding. I passed a car with an open window. The driver fanned himself with a newspaper while a radio host spoke from the dashboard. India. No, I kept saying. No, no, no. I covered my ears. I closed my eyes as tightly as I could. When I opened them again, I was staring at a license plate. Sierra, something broke a window behind me. I dove under a car. A huge weight pressed down on the car above me, almost crushing me, but I crawled out with only a twisted foot. In the low sunlight, I saw the shadow of the floating man. I pulled open a random car door and climbed inside. The blank face passed straight through the passenger window. Something grabbed my shirt and chest and pulled me through the door as if the metal were paper. A torn car door lay between me and the floating man. I picked it up like a shield. Something slammed into it again and again. A sharp bone spike punched through just inches from my face. Then, the door was ripped from my hands. I was exposed. The floating man was only a few feet away. I was bleeding, limping, and gasping for air. I stepped back, knowing I would not be fast enough. Not this time. The seam opened from the top of its head all the way down to its crotch. The floating man split into two halves. Something behind it revealed itself. It had been using the human shape like a disguise, holding the two halves up like a puppet. I could not fully understand what I was seeing. 6 legs, maybe 8, 2 front limbs holding the fake body open, a head covered in circular eyes, arranged like a mix between a honeycomb and a fleshy seed pod. It was wet. Dozens of small bones pushed in and out of the places where eyes should have been. Then it came down on me, open and hungry. I woke up on the floor. I was not breathing. I had fallen out of bed and lost the headband. The fall had knocked the air from my lungs. I was bleeding. My foot hurt. My hand was wounded. My shoulder was wet and red. I crawled toward the bathroom, still unable to breathe. I counted 20 seconds in my head. I reached the sink and pulled myself up, but the sink cracked under my weight. It broke away from the wall and sent me crashing down. A piece of ceramic hit my chest hard. Something dislodged from my throat. I coughed and spat out a bloody piece of cartilage. I lay on the bathroom floor, dragging air into my lungs at last. My phone was buzzing with messages and missed calls. I knew something terrible had happened, but for a moment I only cared that I was finally awake. I could not speak, but I managed to call for help. Doctors later told me I had severe damage to my windpipe. Several blood vessels had burst, especially around my arm, stomach, and shoulder. They thought I had fallen down a flight of stairs. They refused to accept that all of it had happened in my sleep. The body cannot destroy itself like that, one doctor said. When I finally checked my messages, I learned I was not the only one hurt. Norma was in surgery. Pat had a broken leg. Candice was not answering anyone. Later, we found out Candice had died in her sleep. No one could find a connection. The pills were tested and came back as a simple mineral supplement. The headband was nothing special either. Flashing lights, a speaker, a few electrodes, and a memory card. Nothing that looked dangerous. I stayed in the hospital overnight. The next day, before I was discharged, I had a visitor. No one announced him. No nurse warned me. Solomon simply walked in. I was still in bed. He sat beside me and looked almost sorry. "Are you all right?" he asked. I shook my head and pointed to my throat. "Ah," he said. "Right, I'm sorry. We were very clear about people taking the suppressor pill, but we had no idea Lise was effective enough to..." He stopped himself. Then he smiled. He looked excited. "I mean, you still had some residual protection. Technically, you were still partly protected, and it still managed to do all this? Can I see?" He stepped closer. I raised one arm to shield myself and pressed the nurse call button with my other hand. "Sorry," he said. "I'm just curious. This is a major development. We have enough now to begin the next phase. I am very thankful. I want you to know that." He stood and walked toward the door before the nurse arrived. At the doorway, he looked back one last time. "It really is just information," he said, "and information is much cheaper than a missile." Despite everything, Solomon kept his promise. I got the data. I finished my paper. He gave me a strong recommendation. I even added my work on the liminal intrusion system, LIS, to my CV. I do not know why, but that single line opened doors everywhere. Private sector, government, research labs. I could choose almost any path I wanted. Candice died in her sleep. Norma tried to investigate, but the official explanation was a brain aneurysm. None of us who skipped the pill were spared. The study was canceled, but not because anyone admitted it had caused harm. It ended because Solomon and his team got the data they wanted. My career has gone far since then. Solomon is still active. His team has come a long way from using headbands. I think they solved their visual transmission problems. It would not surprise me if they only need lights now. That is why I do not use a smartphone. I know what they can do. I know that if I step too far out of line or say something I am not supposed to say, I could go to sleep one night and never wake up. The worst part is that I would know it was coming. I would hear those 3 words and I would understand. Lima, India, Sierra, Story 4. When I was 4 years old, something happened to me that I have never been able to explain. I am 30 now, and even after all these years, I still cannot say for sure if it really happened or if it was some strange, powerful nightmare that my young mind turned into a memory. I know people always say that memories from early childhood cannot be trusted. I understand that. Most things from that age are blurry or completely gone for me. I do not remember many normal days from back then. I do not remember most of the people I met, the things I did, or the places my parents took me. But I remember this. I remember it with a kind of detail that still bothers me. It happened in early October of 1999, in Richfield, Minnesota, a suburb just outside Minneapolis. My parents lived in a house directly across the street from an elementary school. I do not remember much about the house anymore, not in a full way, but I remember pieces of it. I remember the color of the walls in certain rooms. I remember the smell of the carpet after my mom vacuumed. I remember the sound the front door made when it closed, and I remember the window in my mom's bedroom. That window is the part that has stayed with me the most. The day it happened had that very specific Minnesota fall feeling. The air was cool, but not freezing. The leaves outside had started to change color, and the smell of them seemed to hang over everything. Even now, when I smell wet leaves in October, I sometimes think of that room. It was late afternoon, close to evening, and the sun was beginning to go down. The light coming through the window had turned orange and soft, the kind of light that makes a room feel quiet even before night arrives. I had been napping alone in my mom's bedroom. I do not know why I was in her room instead of my own. Maybe my room was messy. Maybe she had been folding laundry. Maybe I had fallen asleep there earlier in the day, and she had just left me there to rest. That part is gone from my memory. What I do remember is the bed. The bed was pushed against the wall, and the window was directly to the left of it. If you were lying on the bed and turned your head, you could look right out. The window was open because the weather was nice, but the screen was still in place. From that window, you could see part of the side yard and into the neighbor's backyard. There was not much space between the house and that side area. Someone standing outside could get very close to the window if they wanted to. I remember waking up slowly, not all at once, not with fear, just that heavy, sleepy feeling children have when they wake from a nap and do not yet understand what time it is. The room was dim and warm with that orange light. For a few seconds, I was probably confused, still half inside a dream. I remember rolling over toward the window. And then I saw someone standing there. They were right up against the screen, not across the yard, not near the fence, not walking past. Right there. Their face was so close to the window that the screen was the only thing between us. They were wearing what looked exactly like the ghost face mask from Scream. White face, black empty eyes, long frozen mouth. I was only 4, but I knew what it was. By then, the mask was everywhere. Older kids talked about it. You saw it around Halloween. It was the kind of face even a little kid could recognize because it was made to be simple and scary. But seeing it on a TV screen or in a store was one thing. Seeing it pressed near your window while you were waking up from a nap is something else completely. The person was not moving. That is what I remember most clearly. They were not tapping on the glass. They were not trying to open the window. They were not looking around to see if anyone else was nearby. They were just standing there, still as a statue, staring directly at me through the screen. Even now, I can remember the feeling that went through me. It was not just fear. It was confusion first. My child mind did not know what I was looking at. For a moment, I think I was trying to decide if it was real. Maybe it was a decoration. Maybe it was someone playing. Maybe it was a dream still hanging in front of me. But then I understood that a person was there. A real person. And they had been watching me. That was the part that felt wrong, even at that age. It felt like they had been standing there before I woke up. Like I had opened my eyes in the middle of something that had already been happening. Like I was not supposed to see them. Or maybe like they had been waiting for me to see them. I stared back because I could not move. I remember my heart beating so hard that it felt huge inside my chest. I did not know what to do. I did not even scream at first. I just lay there on the bed, frozen, staring at that white mask through the screen. Then the person moved. Slowly, they raised one hand. In that hand was what looked like a large hunting knife. I can still see the way it moved. Not fast, not wild, not like someone trying to scare me quickly and run away. It came up slowly, with control, almost carefully. The person never looked away from me. The mask stayed pointed at my face the whole time. The knife lifted higher and higher until I could see it clearly in the fading light. That was when I screamed for my mom. The scream came out of me before I understood I was doing it. I remember the sound of my own voice filling the room. The second I screamed, the person outside did not run right away. That detail has never left me. They stood there for another second, still facing me. It was only a second, maybe less, but in my memory it feels much longer. Then they turned and ran. They moved away from the window, across the side of the house, and toward the street. I remember the black shape of their clothes passing out of view as the daylight outside grew darker. Then, they were gone. My mom came running into the bedroom almost immediately. I must have been crying and pointing at the window. I tried to explain what I had seen, but I was 4 years old. I probably did not explain it well. I probably said something about a scary face, a person, and a knife. To an adult, especially a parent trying to calm a frightened child, it must have sounded like a nightmare. And maybe it was. That is the thing that has made this memory so hard to hold on to. My mom did not see anyone. By the time she got to the room, there was nothing outside the window. No person, no mask, no knife, no sound of running feet, nothing she could point to and say, yes, something happened here. She comforted me. She told me I had been dreaming. She may have checked outside. I do not remember that part clearly. I only remember the fear in my body and how the window did not feel safe anymore. If the story ended there, I might have accepted that it was a nightmare. A very strong nightmare, maybe, but still a nightmare. Children dream strange things. They wake up confused. They mix dreams with the room around them. I know all of that, but the part that has always bothered me happened the next day. My dad and I were walking along the side of the house. I do not remember why. Maybe he was doing yard work. Maybe I was just following him around the way little kids do. The day was brighter than the one before, and the side of the house looked normal again. The window from my mom's bedroom was above us, set into the wall with exterior panels around it. My dad stopped near that window. He looked at one of the panels beside it and pointed to a mark. It was a gash or scratch in the siding. I remember it being long enough for him to notice. It was not just a tiny scuff. It looked like something had cut or scraped across it. He stared at it for a moment and said something like, "I don't remember that being there." That sentence made my stomach drop. I remember looking at the mark and feeling cold inside. I did not tell him why. I do not know why I stayed quiet. Maybe I was too young to connect everything clearly. Maybe I was scared he would tell me again that it had been a dream. Maybe I did not want to talk about the person at the window because talking about them made them feel real. But I remember thinking about the knife. I remember wondering if that mark had been made the day before. Of course, there are many normal explanations. Maybe the scratch had always been there, and my dad simply had not noticed it before. Maybe something else caused it. A tool. A branch. A repair. Maybe my child memory later connected the mark to the window because it made the story feel complete. Memory can do that. It can take separate things and tie them together without asking permission. I know all of that. But I also know what I remember. I remember waking up in that bed. I remember the orange light in the room. I remember the open window and the screen. I remember the white mask pressed close outside. I remember the black, empty eyes staring at me. I remember the knife rising slowly, so slowly, like the person wanted me to understand what I was seeing. And I remember that mark on the outside of the house. The strangest part is how little else I remember from being 4. Most of my early childhood is gone. I do not remember preschool in any real detail. I do not remember most of the kids I played with. I do not remember many birthdays, family visits, or normal afternoons at home. Those things faded the way childhood memories usually fade, but this stayed. Not as a feeling only, not as a vague idea, as pictures, clear pictures. The window, the mask, the knife, the silence before I screamed. That is what still bothers me most when I think about it now as an adult. If I try to look at it logically, I always come back to the same question. What was that person doing? If it was real, why would someone stand completely still outside a child's window and watch? Why not knock? Why not run away when I started to wake up? Why wait there until I saw them? And if the goal was only to scare me, why raise the knife so slowly? Why not bang on the screen or make some sudden move? Why be so calm? That calmness is what feels wrong. People doing stupid pranks usually act excited or nervous. They run around, laugh, make noise, or try to get a reaction quickly. But this person did not feel like that. Even through a mask, even through a memory from when I was 4, I remember the stillness. I remember the patience. It felt like they were thinking. Waiting, deciding. Sometimes I try to imagine it from the other side of the window. I imagine someone standing in the side yard, close to the screen, looking in at a sleeping child. How long had they been there before I opened my eyes? Seconds? Minutes? Longer? Were they watching me sleep? Were they waiting for me to wake up? Did they have a plan, or did my scream interrupt whatever they were about to do? I do not like thinking about that, but I do. Because the knife was not in my imagination as a blur. It was clear. The motion was clear. The way they raised it was clear. And if that part was real, then it means someone stood outside my window with a knife and made the choice to show it to me. Maybe they wanted to scare me. Maybe they wanted me to remember. Maybe they did not expect me to scream as loudly as I did. I have asked myself many times if I should bring it up to my parents again. I have not done it in years. When I was younger, any time I mentioned it, it was treated like an old nightmare. Not in a cruel way. My parents were not dismissive because they did not care. They just had no proof. To them, I was a child who woke up scared from a nap and saw something that was not there. And maybe they are right. Maybe it was a nightmare. But if it was the most real nightmare I have ever had. It created a memory stronger than almost every real thing from that age. It left behind a fear of windows that lasted for years. Even as I got older, I hated sleeping near windows, especially if the curtains were open. I did not like looking at dark glass at night because part of me always expected to see that white face on the other side. I know this is not a dramatic story with a clear ending. No one was caught. No police report was filed. There was no news story about someone in a mask walking around Richfield with a knife. Nothing happened afterward that proved it one way or the other. That might be why it still stays with me. It is unfinished. It is a memory with no answer. Sometimes I think the lack of an answer is worse than knowing something terrible for sure. If I knew it was a nightmare, I could let it go. If I knew it was real, I could at least understand why it scared me so much. But living between those two possibilities makes the memory feel alive in a strange way. It never settles. All I know is that when I think back to being 4 years old, almost everything is blank, except that late afternoon in October. The room with the orange light, the open window. The screen. The shape standing close enough to touch it, the mask staring in, the knife rising slowly in one careful hand. And then my dad's voice the next day, looking at the side of the house. I don't remember that being there. Maybe that mark meant nothing. Maybe the whole thing was only a child's dream. But I have lived with that memory for 26 years, and I still cannot make it feel harmless. If anyone has ever experienced something like this, even something close, I would want to hear it. I do not know if I am looking for proof, comfort, or just someone else who understands how a memory can stay sharp for your whole life. I only know that I still see that window, I still see that figure, and I still do not know what to make of it. Story 5. I have never told this story to anyone in full, because every time I try to say it out loud, it sounds fake. It sounds like one of those stories people write online for attention, the kind with just enough detail to make strangers argue in the comments about whether it really happened. I know how it sounds. If someone else told me the same thing, I would probably smile, nod, and quietly decide they were either lying or leaving out the real explanation. But Maya was there with me. She remembers the same road, the same house, the same old couple, and the same words through the bedroom door. We have both agreed on one thing since that night. If either of us ever suggests another road trip through the Himalayas, the other one has full permission to slap some sense into her. This happened in October 2023. Maya and I had rented a self-drive car for a short trip through the Himalayan villages near the Indian border. We did not have a proper plan. That was part of the fun at first. We had 4 days, a small car, a bag each, and a rough idea that we wanted mountains, tea, quiet roads, and pretty views. We drove wherever the road looked beautiful. If a village looked interesting, we stopped. If we saw a small cafe with smoke coming from the kitchen, we ate there. If Maya saw a mountain that looked even slightly different from the last mountain, she made me pull over so she could take another photo. By the fourth day, my phone was full of pictures of pine trees, prayer flags, clouds sitting on ridges, and Maya standing in front of every possible valley with the same excited grin on her face. We had been eating simple local food, drinking too much tea, and staying in small guest houses that were usually run by families. It had been one of those trips that makes you feel like you have stepped outside your normal life for a while. On our last evening, we drove to a viewpoint to watch the sunset. The place was higher than we expected, and the road going up was narrow, but the view was worth it. The sky turned orange and pink over the peaks, and for a while, even Maya stopped taking photos and just stood there quietly. We stayed longer than we should have. That was our first mistake. By the time we got back into the car, the sky had already started to darken. Then the rain came. It did not begin softly. It came down all at once, hard and heavy, like someone had opened a door in the sky. Within minutes, the windshield was covered in sheets of water. The wipers were moving as fast as they could, but they still could not clear the glass properly. The road ahead flashed in and out of view with every sweep. I checked the time and knew there was no way we would reach our hotel before midnight. The mountain roads were already difficult in daylight. In rain and darkness, they became something else completely. Maya was quiet beside me, which was rare for her. She kept looking at the road, then at the phone, then at the black shape of the mountains around us. I pulled over near a bend where there was just enough space to stop without blocking the road. My hands were stiff from gripping the steering wheel. I opened Google Maps and searched for the nearest place to stay. A homestay appeared a few kilometers away. The pictures looked warm and cozy. Wooden rooms, thick blankets, a small dining area with low lights, and a view of the mountains in the morning. The reviews were surprisingly good. Too good, maybe, but at that moment we were wet, tired, and nervous. A nearby place with good reviews felt like a gift. Maya read through some of the comments and said, "Looks fine." I wanted it to be fine, so I agreed. The route took us away from the main road almost immediately. At first, it was still beautiful, even in the rain. We passed apple orchards, small houses with tin roofs, tiny orange temples, and sheep huddled near stone walls. Every now and then, we saw a dim light in a window or a dog standing under a porch, watching our car go by. Then, the houses became fewer. The road grew narrow. The guardrails disappeared. The rain kept falling, but now the sound of it seemed louder, because there was nothing else around. No other cars, no voices, no village lights, just the road, the rain, and the dark mountain pressing close on one side while the other side dropped into nothing. Then the navigation froze. The blue line on Google Maps stopped moving. Maya tapped the screen, waited, then lifted her phone higher as if that would help. Her battery was already down to 20%, and the signal had almost disappeared. My own phone was not much better. "It says we're close," she said, but her voice did not sound sure. It was barely 7 in the evening, but in the mountains, night had already swallowed everything. If you have never driven in the Himalayas after sunset, it is hard to explain how quickly the world vanishes. One moment you can see forests, valleys, and the shapes of hills around you. The next, there is only what your headlights touch. Everything beyond that beam might as well not exist. We had not seen another vehicle in nearly 30 minutes. Then the fog came in. Not a light mist, not thin clouds drifting across the road. A wall of fog. It rolled down from the mountain and wrapped around the car until the headlights became 2 pale circles in front of us. I slowed to barely 20 kilometers an hour. Maya stopped trying to refresh the map. Neither of us spoke. That was when we saw the light. A single warm yellow glow appeared somewhere ahead, low on the mountainside. At first, I thought it might be a reflection or some trick caused by the fog. But as we got closer, the shape of a house slowly came into view. It was beautiful in an old, lonely way. 3 stories tall, built of dark wood on a stone foundation, with a weathered tin roof and narrow windows glowing with warm light. Rain ran from the edges of the roof in thin streams. A wooden board hung above the gate, swinging gently in the wind. Most of the paint on the board had faded away, but one word was still visible. Homestay. I cannot explain the relief I felt when I saw it. My shoulders dropped. Maya let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. We parked near the gate and ran through the rain toward the front door. Before I could knock, the door opened. An elderly man stood there, holding a lantern. He looked at us for a moment, and the first thing I noticed was that he did not seem surprised. He seemed relieved. "You girls took the lower road," he said. It was not a question. I nodded, rain dripping from my hair. Yes, Google Maps sent us this way. The old man sighed. It was a tired sound, like he had heard the same thing many times before. "It still sends people that way," he said. Something about the word still made me pause. He stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come in. Do not drive these roads after dark." The moment the heavy wooden door closed behind us, the sound of the rain became softer. The house smelled of cedar wood, smoke, and cardamom tea. A small fire burned in a stone fireplace. The light inside was warm and golden, and for a few seconds it felt almost painfully safe after the road outside. An old woman came from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She looked at our wet clothes and immediately began fussing over us. She told us to take off our shoes, gave us dry towels, and insisted we sit near the fire. When I tried to ask about the room and payment, she waved her hand like that was the least important thing in the world. "First eat," she said. "Then talk." They seemed ordinary. That was what made it easy to calm down. The old man joked about tourists trusting phones more than weather. The old woman complained about people leaving plastic bottles on trekking trails. They asked where we were from, how long we had been traveling, and whether we liked the local food. They reminded me of grandparents, the kind of people who scold you and feed you at the same time. For a while, I convinced myself the strange feeling I had when the man opened the door was just fear from the road. The rain slowed to a drizzle outside. Maya and I sat by the fire, holding hot tea in both hands, trying to get warm. The house creaked now and then, but old wooden houses do that. I told myself everything was fine. Then someone came down the stairs in a hurry. A man stepped into the room carrying a backpack. He looked like a backpacker, maybe late 20s or early 30s. He had a helmet under one arm and a tired face, but not the normal kind of tired you get from traveling. His eyes looked strained. He kept glancing toward the front windows every few seconds, as if he expected to see someone standing outside in the fog. He barely looked at us. The old woman handed him a wrapped packet of sandwiches. "Leaving already?" "I should have left before sunset," he said. His voice shook. The old man stood near the fire, watching him carefully. "You can stay another night." The backpacker shook his head right away. No, it was not loud, but it was desperate. That one word made the room feel colder. "I have to keep driving," he said. The old woman pressed the food into his hand. He thanked her quickly, grabbed his helmet, and went to the door. The old man did not try to stop him again. Maya and I listened as the front door opened and closed. A moment later, the motorcycle engine started outside. It sounded rough at first, then steadied. The sound moved away from the house, down the wet road and into the fog. For a while, we could still hear it echoing through the valley. Then, it grew quieter. Quieter, then nothing. No fading rumble, no crash, no shout, just silence. A few moments later, the old woman noticed a flannel shirt hanging over the back of a chair near the fire. "He forgot this," she said. The old man did not even turn around. He stood near the window, staring into the dark beyond the glass. After a long moment, he said quietly, "It is too late." I thought he meant the backpacker had already gone too far to catch. That made sense. It was raining, the road was dangerous, and chasing him would be pointless. Still, something in his voice stayed with me. Our room was on the second floor. It was simple but clean, with 2 narrow beds, thick blankets, a small writing desk, and a window that looked toward the front lawn. The old woman gave us extra quilts and told us to sleep well. The old man stood at the end of the hallway, watching quietly as she showed us the room. Before leaving, he said, "Lock your door if it helps you rest." I remember thinking that was an odd thing to say. Maya fell asleep faster than I did. I lay awake for a long time, listening to the rain and the soft groans of the house. The room smelled faintly of wood and old wool. Every now and then, the wind pressed against the window, and the glass shivered in its frame. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up because I smelled smoke. At first, I thought the fireplace downstairs had grown too strong, or something inside the house had caught fire. My heart jumped. I sat up and listened. Maya was still asleep in the other bed, one arm hanging out from under her blanket. The smell was not strong enough to be an emergency, but it was sharp. Fresh smoke. I got out of bed and went to the window. Very carefully, I pulled the curtain aside. The old couple were standing on the front lawn. Between them, a small fire burned in the wet grass. It was not a bonfire. It was only big enough to burn one thing. The backpacker's flannel shirt. The old man held it over the flames with long iron tongs. The old woman stood beside him with her hands folded in front of her. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them looked frightened. They looked calm. Focused, practiced. That was the word that came into my mind, and once it did, I could not get rid of it. They looked like they had done this before. The shirt blackened and curled in the fire. Smoke rose in thin gray lines and disappeared into the fog. When there was nothing left but ash, the old man carried it with the tongs to a cedar tree near the side of the house. The old woman knelt down and dug a small hole with a flat stone. Together, they buried the ashes beneath the tree. I stepped away from the window before they could look up and see me. My first instinct was to check the bedroom door. I turned the lock once, then again, then pulled the handle to make sure it held. It did. But it did not feel like enough. There was a small writing desk near the wall. I dragged it in front of the door as quietly as I could. It scraped against the wooden floor, and I froze every time it made a sound. Maya woke up halfway through and whispered my name. I told her what I had seen. She sat up slowly, her face pale in the dark. Neither of us slept properly after that. We sat on one bed with the quilts around us, listening. Every creak sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind sounded like someone breathing outside the window. The rain had stopped, which made the silence worse. Around 3 in the morning, I looked out the window again. The old couple were gone, but the little fire beneath the cedar tree was still burning. It should not have been. It was too small. The shirt had already burned. The grass was wet. There was no wood in the flames, but the fire flickered quietly at the base of the tree, giving off a dim orange light. It made no sound. I closed the curtains and checked the door again. At exactly 4:30 in the morning, someone knocked, not at the front door, at our bedroom door. It started as one hard knock, then another, then another. The door shook with each blow. The desk in front of it scraped back slightly. Maya grabbed my arm so tightly it hurt. The knocking was not polite. It was frantic. Desperate, like someone needed to get inside before something terrible happened. I opened my mouth, but Maya covered it with her hand. Then we heard the old woman's voice through the wood. "Do not worry." A pause. "It is not your turn yet." The knocking continued. Maya and I did not answer. We moved as quietly as we could into the tiny dressing room attached to the bedroom. We locked that door too and sat on the floor in the dark, knees pulled to our chests, staring at the thin line of light under the door. The knocking did not stop. I kept looking at my phone. The battery was low, but the screen still worked. 4:45, 4:56, 5:29, 5:47. At 5:47, the knocking stopped. Not slowly, not like someone got tired and walked away. It stopped instantly. At the same moment, the first gray light of morning appeared through the bedroom window. We waited for several minutes before leaving the dressing room. The bedroom door was still locked. The desk was still in front of it. There were no marks on the wood, no dents, no sign that anyone had been pounding on it for over an hour. We did not talk about it. We did not need to. All we wanted was to leave. When we went downstairs, everything was normal again. The old woman was in the kitchen making tea. The old man was sweeping near the front door. The fire was out. The cedar tree looked ordinary in the morning light. There was no smoke, no ash, no sign of the small fire we had seen. The old woman packed sandwiches for us to take on the road. Neither of us had the courage to refuse. When I asked about payment, the old man shook his head. "No payment," he said. I tried to argue, but he only smiled gently. As we walked to the car, he stood in the doorway and said, "Next time you visit us, try to arrive before sunset." I forced myself to smile back. There was never going to be a next time. I drove away as fast as I safely could. Neither Maya nor I spoke for almost 40 minutes. We kept looking in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the house or the old man standing in the road behind us, but there was only fog, trees, and a wet mountain road. Eventually, we stopped at a roadside tea stall. It was a small place with plastic chairs, a tin roof, and steam rising from a large pot. We ordered tea mostly because we needed to be around someone normal. The owner was friendly. He asked where we had come from so early. "Mountain View Homestay," I said. He frowned. "There is no homestay around here." Maya and I looked at each other. "There is," I said. "Old wooden house, elderly couple, a cedar tree near the front." The tea stall owner stared at us for several seconds. Then he asked, "You took the lower road?" I nodded. His expression changed. He pointed back toward the road we had come from. That house burned down 25 years ago. My stomach dropped so hard I felt dizzy. "That is not possible," Maya whispered. The man shook his head. "No one stays there. There is nothing there now." Right there at the tea stall, with my hands still shaking, I opened Google Maps and checked my timeline. Nothing. No destination. No route. No record that we had stopped at any homestay. According to my phone, we had driven through the area without stopping at all. Maya checked hers. Same thing. We should have left it alone. We should have driven straight to our hotel, packed our things, and gone home. But fear does strange things to people. Sometimes it makes you run. Sometimes it makes you need proof. So we drove back. We found the bend in the road. We found the old rusted gate posts. We found the cedar tree. But the house was gone. Not burned down. Not ruined. Gone, there was no stone foundation. No broken wood. No old tin roof. No path to the door. No sign that a 3-story wooden house had ever stood there. The land behind the gate was covered in forest, thick with weeds and damp leaves. The cedar tree stood exactly where I remembered it. At its base, the soil looked darker than the ground around it. Maya and I did not dig. We did not speak. We got back in the car and left. After that, we swore we would never talk about it. Not to friends, not to family, not online. We did not want questions we could not answer. We did not want people laughing or telling us we had been tired, confused, or scared by a normal house we could not find again. For 2 weeks, we kept that promise. Then Google Photos finished syncing. I was at home, putting together an Instagram photo dump from the trip. I had pictures of the sunset, the tea stalls, the mountain roads, Maya standing in front of every possible view. As I was scrolling, a notification appeared. Rediscover this memory. I frowned because I did not recognize the photo preview. I opened it. It was a picture of Maya and me standing in front of the homestay. For a few seconds, I could not move. There it was. The old wooden house, the warm windows, the faded sign, the cedar tree. Maya and I stood near the gate, smiling at the camera. The old couple stood in the doorway behind us. I did not remember anyone taking that photo. My first thought was that maybe one of us had taken it and forgotten. Maybe the old man had offered. Maybe we were so frightened later that the memory got buried. I wanted that to be true. Then I checked the details. The timestamp was October 28, exactly 2 weeks after we had returned home. I checked it again, then again, then again. It was not edited. It was not a screenshot. It was not downloaded from somewhere else. According to my phone, the photo had been taken on October 28 at the homestay. A place that did not exist. A date that had not happened when we were there. Then I noticed something worse. Maya and I were not wearing the clothes we had worn that night. In the photo, we were both wearing matching fleece jackets we had bought 3 days after leaving the mountains. We did not own those jackets when we stayed at the homestay. I called Maya immediately. She answered on the first ring. She did not say hello. She only said, "Did you zoom in?" I had not. I wish I never had. At first I thought the worst part would be the old couple standing behind us. But when I zoomed in, I saw that they were not looking at the camera. Neither were Maya and I. All 4 of us were staring toward the trees behind the house. I increased the brightness. Someone was standing between the trees. The figure was too far away to make out clearly. It looked like a person, but not quite right. The shoulders seemed too narrow. The head was angled strangely. It was not facing the camera. It was facing the house. Waiting, I still have the photo. I do not open it anymore. Not because of the old couple. Not because of the house. Not even because of the figure in the trees. I do not open it because every few weeks, Google Photos tells me it has recognized a new face in that picture. The number keeps increasing. I have never gone back to that road. But according to my phone, someone keeps taking pictures there.